One of the features of Windows 7 that I really like is the new AppLocker feature. You see, back in earlier versions of Windows, Microsoft, they gave us the ability to use group policy to perform software restriction. Now, software restrictions, of course, were allowing us to restrict certain types of software from running inside our domain. But in Windows 7, though, we now have got some new policies that improve on these old ones, and they're all packaged now under the name of AppLocker. Now, the only catch to using these policies, of course, is that you will need to be running Windows 7 Ultimate or the Enterprise Edition of Windows 7 or Windows 2008 R2 in order to take advantage of all these new features. But all of the older policies, they're still available for the older operating systems like XP and Windows Vista, but AppLocker, as we'll see it in a moment, it is a Windows 7 and Windows 2008 R2 only affair. So let's go and take a look at it. So to do that, we'll go and click on Start. We'll type in gpedit.msc and we'll hit Enter. And this is going to open up the local group policy editor on this Windows 7 machine. So let's just expand this so we can see what we're dealing with here. And at the top on the left here, under our computer configuration heading, we're going to expand Windows settings. We'll expand security settings. Down here, we'll expand application control policies. And we'll choose AppLocker. In fact, let's just expand AppLocker so we can see the options that we've got underneath as well. So here we've got 3 empty containers underneath at the moment. We've got executable rules, and let's just move this over a little bit. Our Windows installer rules and script rules. And now if we click on AppLocker at the top here, over here in the middle or in the right-hand side, if you like, of our console, right down the bottom, you can see that we've got links to each of these 3 sections here, and it tells us that the current states of our rule enforcement, as you can see, is not currently configured, but the rules are being enforced. Now, in the middle of this console, let's take a look at what it says here, that for the AppLocker policy to be enforced on any computer, the application identity service must be running. Okay, so let's go and take a look at that real quick. So we'll go and click on Start. We'll type in services.msc and we'll hit Enter. And almost right at the top here, in fact, it's the 4th one down, we're looking for the application identity service. And you can see here that it currently isn't running, it's set to manual. So this service does need to be running in order to use AppLocker. So I'm going to start this service, and to do that we'll simply select it and then click on the little play or start green arrow icon here at the top here. And the reason that I'm choosing to leave it at manual and just start up the service rather than set it to automatic, I'm not going to set it to automatic just yet, because if you're new to these software restriction policies, I'd recommend that you don't set it to automatic either. Now, the reason is that if you go ahead and you create a rule that locks you out of your own system, and believe me, that's entirely possible, then all you'll need to do is reboot, and since this service is set to manual, it won't start up by itself, and if this service isn't started, then the rules won't apply. So starting this service is fine. Well, in fact, it's actually mandatory for AppLocker to work. Just be aware that if this service is started, the moment you create any AppLocker rule, it'll take effect immediately. And in a moment, I'll show you that you can get in trouble with these rules if you're not careful. So I'd recommend sticking with a manual startup type right now. When you're sure you've got everything down right and it's not going to prevent you from getting into your own system, then you can change this to an automatic startup type. Okay, well, let's go back to our policy editor here. And down here you'll see it next says use the enforcement settings for each rule collection to configure whether rules are being enforced or audited. But here's the key part. If rule enforcement has not been configured, then rules will be enforced by default. So what this means is, once you turn this feature on, whether you've configured rule enforcement or not, rules are going to be enforced. That's the default behavior. So if we click on this hyperlink here to configure rule enforcement, it'll pop up this new window with these 2 tabs you see here. Now here, we can choose to enforce rules for our executable rules, Windows installer rules, and our script rules. And all of these 3 sections here match these 3 sections here over on the left of our console. So what it's saying is this. If we create a rule in any of these three containers here on the left, then the default behavior of AppLocker is to enforce that rule on any computer that's applying this policy. However, if we come here into this window and then check these boxes, we now have the choice to enforce these rules, which will allow us to allow or block files from being run, or we can audit computers only and not enforce the rules on them. Now, auditing just allows you to test how your rules would be applied to your systems without actually enforcing them. And if we audit files, we can then track what applications are being used, and this information will be stored in the AppLocker log in the event viewer. So simply put, if we configure the settings here inside this window, we've got the choice whether we want to simply audit files or enforce the rules. If we don't configure these settings and we create rules, they'll be enforced anyway. Now, I will point out there is actually a fourth category as well, DLL rules. And if we click the Advanced tab, we've got the ability here to enable the DLL rule collection as well. But it doesn't appear by default, as misconfiguring this rule can really slow things down. And it also means that AppLocker needs to check every single DLL that an application uses, so Microsoft doesn't make it appear by default. All right, well, let's cancel this and let's go and see what a rule looks like. And for those of you that have used software restriction policies in Windows Server before, you're probably going to be familiar with these straight away. So let's go and create an executable rule. So we'll select executable here, and on the right-hand side, our window's blank, so we'll right-click, and you can see we've got three options. We can create a new rule, we can automatically generate rules, and we can create default rules. Now, you might be thinking, well, I want to create a rule, so the first option here is looking like the one that you probably want. Well, not so fast, because if we go ahead and we create a rule, and it's not a very well thought out rule, we could easily lock ourselves out of the system. So to prevent these mishaps, the first thing you should do is to create the default rules. So we'll select Create Default Rules, and magically we've got three new rules appear. Now, the first one here allows everyone to be able to run all files inside our Program Files folder. The second one allows everyone to run all files in the Windows folder. And the third one allows the built-in administrator's account to be able to access all files. Now, actually, I did mention a moment ago that I'd show you how you can get in trouble with these rules. So here goes. Since I'm logged on with the administrator account, and this bottom rule here allows the administrator to access all files, I'm just going to right-click on this rule, and we'll choose Properties. And I'm going to change this from Allow to Deny, and now I'll click Apply. So now it's live. Let's go and test it. We'll click Start, and let's open something up. How about the calculator? Nope. We've been blocked by Group Policy. Contact a System Administrator. All right, well, what about Sticky Notes? Nope. No, we're in trouble here. What about Paint? Well, nothing works, so we are in trouble. Now you might understand how serious this can be. Maybe you might also understand why I didn't set that service to automatic. Because if I enabled this rule and clicked OK, and the service was set to automatic, I'm in trouble because the service would start immediately once our system's rebooted, these rules would apply, and I'd still be locked out. So thankfully, with the service set to manual, I could reboot this machine and fix the problem. But since I actually didn't close this window here, I can still set it back to allow, and then click Apply. And now if I go and run, say, the Windows calculator again, this time we're back in business. All right, now, because these rules have been created, I'll quickly make mention of what the second item here does in our right-click menu to automatically generate rules. Now, what this does is run a quick wizard against a folder of your choice, and it will automatically generate rules for all of the files inside that folder. All right, well, let's go and take a quick look at it. We'll select Automatically Generate Rules. Now you'll see here it defaults to analyzing the program files folder, and let's just run it against that. But let's consider a scenario where you might be building the company standard operating environment, an SOE, a SOE master if you like, and you've got a bunch of applications and you're prepping a standard build that you want to deploy out to all of your staff. Now you could use this feature and run it against the locations that you've chosen to install your software in. Now you can apply this to a specific user or a group, or in this case you can see that it's applying to everyone, and at the bottom you can give it a name if you like. So let's just click Next here, and we can see that the default is to create publisher rules for any file that's digitally signed. Now if it's not signed, it's going to create this hash rule, or if you prefer, you could use a path rule. Now the hash rule is definitely the more reliable option, since a file can easily be identified by its hash value, which is simply just a mathematical calculation done on the file which produces a hash. Now if the hash matches, then the file is what it claims to be. Whereas with a path rule, that only works on files that are inside the program files folder in this case. But if a user moves that file outside the path specified in a path rule, then the rule won't apply. So hashes are definitely better. Now we could also choose to create a hash rule for all files if we like. So why would we then want to choose a publisher rule over this hash rule? Well, there's one key difference between a hash and a publisher rule. If a file happens to be updated, then its hash changes and it will no longer match a hash rule. However, if a publisher rule finds that a file's changed, such as when a patch or an update is released, then it won't affect the rule at all. Or perhaps when a location of a file changes again, with a publisher rule, the rule's not affected. So whilst you can change the options that you see here, in most cases you're going to leave the defaults as they're probably going to be the best choice. Now at the bottom here we've got this checkbox here to reduce the number of rules created by grouping similar items or similar files. Now what this does is it attempts to reduce the number of rules by grouping together files that are created by the same publisher or the same path, or it'll create a single hash rule for all files. Otherwise, you might have a page full of rules here if you've got a lot of applications. So what this will do is it'll attempt to keep things in a nice tight bunch of order. So let's leave the defaults as they are. They do represent, in most cases, the best scenario, the best choices. We'll click Next, and it's going to scan our files in the folder we chose, and it'll spit out this table that you see here telling us what rules it's going to add to our policy. Well, since this is a brand new installation of Windows 7, it's found 33 files that rules can be created for, but it only needs to create 2 publisher rules to allow all of these applications. So let's click this first hyperlink here to review files that were analysed. And this is going to throw up a window here where we're now able to see all of the executable files. And you'll note that if we scroll down here, after I expand these columns, let's take a look down, particularly at this publisher column. You'll see here that they're all going to be the same publisher. Yes, they're definitely all the same publisher there. So our reason we're going to need 2 rules must be because one of the product names, in fact, you can see right here, one of the product names is different. We've got the product name of Microsoft Windows Operating System, and here we have Windows Internet Explorer. So that's why we've been told that we need 2 different publisher rules. All right, well, let's click Create, and all the magic will be done for us. All right, now what we can see here is our 2 rules. They've been created. We've got our rule here, our publisher rule here for any executable file that is published by Microsoft Windows Operating System. And of course, any publisher has published a Windows Internet Explorer file. Now, I really must admit that I really didn't need to create these rules anyway, since my very first rule at the top here in our default rules allows all files inside our program files folder to run anyway. But the point of that exercise wasn't really to double up on rules here, it was to demonstrate how you could use this feature to automatically generate rules for any folder on your system. Now, I did hold off on mentioning this, but one of the most important things you need to understand with AppLocker is its default behavior. Now, when you've got no rules created, and let's click on, say, scripts here, In here right now, we've got no script rules at all. This means that the default behavior of AppLocker is to allow all scripts. But the very moment that we create one single rule in this container, regardless of what that rule is, AppLocker's default behavior now becomes deny everything unless it's been explicitly defined in a rule. Right, so right now we've got no script rules. Now we also should have no Windows installer rules. So if we have a script or a Windows installer package, we could run it as the default AppLocker behavior is to allow these things since we have no rules. However, if we go back to our executable rules folder here, we've now got 5 rules in here. And the moment that we created the very first rule, our default behavior became deny everything that's not defined in any of these rules. So when looking at these rules, everyone can run files in the program files folder. They can run files in the Windows folder. Only admins can run any file from anywhere. But if I right-click on this admin rule and delete it, then that would mean that only these first 2 rules here would apply, and everything else is denied based upon the default behavior of AppLocker. So let's test it out. Let's just right-click here on our All Files rule for the built-in administrators group, and let's delete it. And we'll say yes. Now let's quickly drop to our desktop here, where I've got an old version of a port scanner application here called SuperScan. Now, I was rummaging around looking for a small executable file, and this is what I found, but hey, it serves my purposes for this demo. Now, this simply is a standard executable file. If I try double-clicking on it, you can see that even though I am logged on, as an administrator, I can't run it. You see, I've been blocked by our policy. But if I close this, and we'll click on Start, and we'll go to Computer, I'll go to my C drive, and then we'll go to our Program Files folder. And you'll note that the reason that I can use Windows Explorer, of course, is that the executable for Windows Explorer lives within the Windows folder, and the rules do allow me to access files in that folder. So now that we're here, let's just drag and drop our SuperScan executable into our Program Files folder here, and let's double click on it now, and you can see that we can now run it. So that just goes to show you how powerful and how troublesome all this can be if you get things wrong. So the moment you create one rule in any container, then all of the other files that you didn't specify in the rule, they're automatically denied, as you just saw. So I'll quickly just reset what we did here by right-clicking again and choose to create our default rules. And that'll bring here our administrator's rule back. So let's go and create a rule. And it doesn't matter whether we create an executable rule, whether we create a Windows installer rule, or a script rule. The rule itself is the same. It's just the target file type, really. That's the key differentiator. So while we're here, let's just stick with our executable rules. And since I've now got a copy of SuperScan here, sitting here inside our Program Files folder to run, let's create a rule that denies it from running. So we'll go back to the console, let's right-click here, and we'll choose to create a new rule. Now, we've got this quick intro here. Before we continue, though, do make sure that the application you want to create the rule for does exist on this computer. And I recommend that you back up any existing rules and read the documentation. All right, well, we can skip this page if we like. In fact, I will do that. We'll click Next. Okay, do we want the file to run or not? Well, in this case, no. We're going to set the application to be denied, and we don't want anyone to run it, so we'll leave the default group at everyone, and we'll click Next. Now, what type of condition do we want to create? We can create a publisher, a path, or a hash rule. Now, since this SuperScan application isn't signed by the publisher, I'm going to choose a file hash rule for this example. Otherwise, a publisher rule would probably be the best choice. Now, a path rule is only going to work if SuperScan remains inside the Program Files folder, and as you saw, that can be easily circumvented. So a hash rule it is. We'll click Next. Now we need to browse to where the executable is, so let's click Browse, and we'll go to our C drive, Program Files, and we'll select the application there. We'll click Open. Now we can add in more files if we like to this rule. We could simply browse for those as well, but we'll leave it as it is. We'll click Next. Now we can give this a name if we like, or we could simply accept the default name here, which is simply just taken from the file name. I'll leave it as it is. I won't provide an optional description, but of course in a production environment, I certainly would be filling in that information. And we're done basically, so let's click Create. And there's our rule. So let's go and test it. Let's go back to Windows Explorer, and we'll try and open up our SuperScan application, and you can see that we can't. This rule that we just created has blocked us. Now, if we try, in fact, let's just go to our desktop so we can see it there. If we try and copy that file over to our desktop and run it from there, again, we can't. It's been blocked. Now, since this executable file here is always going to have the same hash value, it'll be always blocked by this rule, no matter where this file happens to be stored on our computer. Okay, so that's a hash rule. So let's move on and let's see if we can look at a publisher rule, since those types of rules, they're going to be the preferred rule type whenever you have signed files. Now, for those of you that have come this far, though, in this video, you're probably thinking, hang on, these are all local policies we're creating. So can I use these policies in my domain and deploy them using group policy? Well, the answer there is yes, you can do it, but you'll first need to install the remote server admin tools for Windows 7. And you can download them from this location here. In fact, you're probably not going to want to read that out, although you can pause this video and take a look at that if you like. Alternatively, if you just go to Bing or Google and type in RSAT, you'll find links out to this page. In fact, that's how I found this URL myself. All right, now I happen to have these tools already downloaded to my computer, so I'm going to go and fire up Windows Explorer here and go to my CD-ROM, and there's one of the files that we need for these remote admin tools. So we're going to double click on this file, and it's going to run through a quick installation wizard, and it'll get these things ready for our workstation. All right, so we're going to click Yes here to install this update, and then we'll need to accept the license agreement. And then, of course, our installation will begin. Now, this will take a minute or so to install these tools, so I'm going to pause the video here, and we'll come back in a moment once it's all done. All right, it's done. The RSAT tools, the remote server admin tools for Windows 7, has now been installed, so let's click Close. And now we'll go and click, in fact, we'll just remove that there, we'll get rid of these things. We'll go and click Start. We'll launch the control panel. We're going to select Programs. And at the top, we'll click this link here to turn Windows features on or off. And since we've now installed the tools, we'll see a new entry here for remote server administration tools. So let's expand that. We'll expand feature administration tools. And we'll place a check next to the group policy management tools option. We'll click OK. Now, bear in mind that this could take a minute or two to install this feature, so I'm going to pause the video here and we'll come back in just a moment. Great, it's done. The group policy management tools have been installed, so we'll now close our control panel. We don't need that anymore. We'll click Start and we'll select the administrative tools and we'll fire up the group policy management console. Okay, well, let's go and expand our forest, jawkus.com. We'll expand domains. We'll expand our domain. And now what we're going to do is we're going to right-click on our default domain policy, and we'll choose Edit. And, of course, that's going to bring up our group policy management editor here. So under our computer configuration, we're going to expand Policies. We'll expand Windows Settings. We'll expand Security Settings. Down the bottom, we'll expand Application Control Policies. And under here, we'll expect to see AppLocker, so let's expand that. And you'll notice that we've got the exact same setup here. Although you will note that if we click through these three containers here, that they're currently blank, obviously since we're now targeting our domain, not just the local machine like we did before. So again, a wise move would be to right-click in here and to create the default rules. Although I won't do this right now, I'll show you what happens if you don't choose to create these default rules. So let's just choose the top option. Let's just create a new rule, and that's going to start up a new wizard, and we've seen this wizard before. So we'll leave the default behavior here at an allow rule for the everyone group. In fact, let's change the everyone group. Let's click select, and I'm going to type in the help desk group, and we'll click check names. All right, there it is. We'll click OK. Now let's click next. I'm going to make this a publisher rule. We'll click next again. And what we'll do for this example is we'll create a rule that allows members of the help desk to run the Windows calculator, and we want to prevent anyone who isn't a member of the help desk from running the Windows calculator. So let's click browse, and we'll go to our C drive, our Windows folder. We'll scroll down and locate System32, and we'll scroll down now and we'll locate the calculator executable. There it is. We'll select that. We'll click open. And notice that this window here now has automatically been populated with the particulars of the publisher for this file. Now, this rule is being pretty specific here. It's matching for Microsoft here for the publisher, the product name being the Microsoft Windows operating system, the file being calc.exe, and the version being 6.1.0.0. But let's say that Microsoft release a minor upgrade to this file and they call it 6.1.0.1. Well, the file version will still match because this publisher rule by default is matching this version and above. So by going from 6.1.0 to 0 to 0.1, it'll still match. But what if Microsoft also change its file name from calc.exe to calculator.exe? Well, in that case, this rule will no longer match. But if we move this slider up, we could now get it to match wildcards instead. So any file version or file name will match this rule as long as the product name is from Microsoft Windows operating system and the publisher is Microsoft Corporation. So as you can see, by moving this slider bar up and down here, you've got a fair bit of flexibility if you want to override any of these default settings. Now, of course, if you do want to override any of these default settings, you can also check this box here to use custom values, and these fields here now become fully editable, so you can modify those as you see fit. All right, well, let's just kick on with the defaults here. We'll click next. At this screen, we can choose to add any exceptions to this rule if we like. Now, I'm not going to do that right now. Let's just click next here, and the final step will be to give this a name. Now, I'm just going to shorten this because it's rather long. Let's just shorten it to calc.exe, and we'll click create. Now, since we haven't created the default rules yet, in fact, you'll recall that I deliberately chose not to create them a moment ago, we're going to get this warning pop up that we haven't created any default rules yet. So do we want to create them now? Now, obviously, we should create them. So I wanted to point out that you'd get this warning. So we're going to say yes here, and we're going to get 4 rules created for us, the default 3, and our calculator rule as well. Now, we actually do have one problem with our rule right now. We just created a rule that said anyone from the help desk, they can run the Windows calculator. But that rule is defunct anyway, because the second rule here in our default rules is what allows anyone or all users the ability to run anything within our Windows folder, which of course includes the calculator. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click on this rule here and we'll select properties. Let's go to our exceptions tab. We're going to choose add. Now we'll click browse, and let's go and navigate into our System32 folder here. We'll scroll down and locate the calculator file right there. We'll select that and click open. All right, there's the file details. We don't need to make any changes there. We'll click OK again. All right, now once we click OK here, essentially what we're doing is we're creating a rule that says everyone can run any program that's stored inside the Windows folder, except, because we've got an exception here, except the calculator. So since we all know by now that if a file isn't defined, the default behavior becomes deny. So everyone will be denied the ability to run the calculator, but every other file within the Windows folder, that'll be allowed to run. Then we've got another rule down the bottom here, our calculator rule, which says if you happen to be a member of the help desk group, then you can run the calculator. So what we've just done is we've locked down an application for everyone in the entire domain, except those people that are a member of the help desk group. So by using this method, you can selectively choose applications that are only intended to be run by certain people, and I can imagine that you do have certain tools, for example, ones that you might need to run as an administrator, that you could create these sorts of exceptions for, but regular users would therefore be denied the ability to run them. Now, you might also ask, what about creating a deny rule then? What if I just created a rule that denied the calculator and then assigned that to everyone, and then created an allow rule and allow it just for the help desk? Well, unfortunately, that won't work, because just like file permission entries, a deny entry in an AppLocker rule will override an allow one. So if you do use deny entries, just make sure that you've thought them out first. Otherwise, you might find things aren't working as you've intended. So in this video, we've talked about AppLocker, the new and improved way of creating software restriction policies. Now, as you've seen, it's not terribly difficult to create these rules and apply them to a local machine or indeed a domain, but be careful, because you need to give attention to these rules themselves, as you've seen what can happen when rules aren't thought out properly. So now you should be able to create AppLocker rules, but remember, they will only apply to Windows 7 machines running the Ultimate or the Enterprise Edition, or Windows 2008 R2. So if you do have older machines in your company, and I'll expect that most of you at the time of this recording are going to have mostly XP or even Vista machines, then these policies simply won't apply to those machines. So in that case, if you're still running software restriction policies and then you want to start configuring AppLocker policies for your Windows 7 and your Windows 2008 R2 machines, only the AppLocker policies will apply. So the solution is to make sure that you create AppLocker and software restriction policies in separate group policy objects, and then everything is going to work as expected. So we hope you've enjoyed this video, and would like to thank you for watching.